Woke, woke. There are so many things going on around. You must take heed. It's been written and prophesied about, so you must believe. Not everything that glitters is gold. Pay attention as it's been told. Join us every Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern, with Brother Yusuf as he tackles and breaks down current events, current news, and politics, and the Islamic Ummah. Please join us, streaming on all major platforms. Channel Sunnahfollowers.
Their rise and migration through Europe, ultimately their controls of all aspects of power. We're really going to see the kind of genesis of that, if you will, tonight with the Rothschilds, which I left off with at the end of part one, was the birth of Mayer Amschel Bauer, who would go on to become one of the most infamous men in human history, Mayer Rothschild. And we are going to see tonight how influential he was and taking over the economies of Western Europe, particularly England, as we already covered, some of their aspirations for France, and ultimately we will close with what was going on in the United States, which was a new country during that time. Things were not always as they are now, as we are going to see. But always, when you do something like this, you have to put these disclaimers in, because what they've done to shield themselves from this is they've hid behind their religion. As we exposed last week, the vast majority of these people do not even believe in God. It was something to the effect of 45% in some studies were active atheists. We chronicled the homosexuality that was prevalent in Israel. And when you dare to criticize a group of people for doing things that are documented, things that they've openly admitted to, you're inevitably going to be heard. You're a hater. You're a bigot. You know, they don't really call you racist in this context, but they'll call you the famous anti-Semite. You know, this issue has absolutely nothing to do with religion. They are not practicing, Judaism. We showed that already. We're going to continue to show that. I'm not someone who solely dislikes them or has grievances with them because of a religious reason. Granted, they did reject in some sections the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They did reject Isa. May Allah be pleased with him as well. They have rejected numerous prophets, but that is not the sole purpose of this critique. We are talking about things that they have actually done. We talked about the being expelled, the expulsions from a variety of nations, of different cultures, different belief systems. We showed the calculation of what they were doing, the usury, the exploitation of people, mass murder, slavery. We covered all these abhorrent moral activities that they were engaged with. This has nothing to do with race or religion. This is judging someone purely by the content of their character and the result of their actions and the intention. As we are going to see tonight, remember that word, the intention of their actions, because it is very clear, as you were going to see tonight, that they did not have our best interests in mind. A lot of people have tried to blow this off by saying, oh, they're just greedy. These people, the elites, the Zionists, the Illuminati, the Masons, Jew as in general terms, they're just greedy. We are going to see tonight that money was never the motivation. This was about planetary conquest and human enslavement. And for that, they are guilty as charged. This has nothing to do with any religious critique. Again, you'll hear some charges against Christians. Oh, the Jews killed Jesus, and this being their, the source of their animosity. But that is not the direction we are going here in this series. These go far beyond religious. Now, do all Jews deserve this? Absolutely not. There are plenty of Jews out there who are unaware, who have spoken out in favor of Palestine and a Palestinian state, particularly in the Orthodox communities. Sheikh Ibrahim Jamali has met with several of them. There are many brave and courageous Jews out there who deserve our respect and deserve our kindness. And of course, we are not talking about them. So when I use that term, I always just want to preface it with this, that we are not in any way damning an entire group of people, but we are talking about an elite that is comprised and overrepresented of a certain demographic of people who have caused these problems Muslims every single country they have dwelled. So that being said, we will now move on. So I started off last week with some questions. I had talked about the references in Genesis to the nation promised to Abraham and his descendants. So I asked you basically to think about those as we moved on. Now, we answered those questions. We showed clearly the vast majority, 90% of the current demographic of Judaism, or Jews, practicing Jews in the world, were not of this bloodline at all. In fact, they were Asiatic and Turkish. They came from an area known as Khazaria. They have no ties to the biblical homeland. We established that. So is the promise from Genesis valid? Well, I could say arguably, absolutely. You know, it is. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was a descendant of Abraham. And his ummah, are the true followers of monotheism. We are the last of our kind. Christianity is not monotheist. No matter how much they say, you can't have a trinity of three different beings with different sets of attributes and call it the same God. You simply cannot do that. The Son doesn't have the knowledge of the Father. The Father has supreme knowledge of the Son. The Son submits to the Father. You can't have three, beings being one when they have different attributes. They have different abilities. The Holy Spirit is not the same as the Son. In fact, the Catholic Church states that the Son and the Father emit the Holy Spirit. So therefore, the Holy Spirit has different attributes than the Son and the Father. So Christianity is not monotheist. And we've seen, of course, what is happening with Israel and Jews in general. Over 45% are not even believing in God. So we as Muslims, we are the keepers of true monotheism. The Prophet ﷺ was a descendant of Abraham. The promise, for all eternity dwells within us, within our creed, within our belief system. And plus these people that I highlighted, again, zero connection to the Holy Land to the tune of 90%. They cannot be the fulfillment of that promise, whether it be spiritually, they're not practicing, they're not following the law of Moses, the law of the Torah, which is equally represented in our Islamic Sharia. They're not following the laws of decency, obviously. They cannot be the keepers of this. This land spiritually belongs to the Ummah. We are the keepers of the flame of truth. And that's going to be opening up again where we're at. So we left off last week with the birth of Moses Amschel Bauer, the most infamous day in history in February 23rd, 1744. This man, again, as we are going to see here, just his impact alone. If only a being besides the Prophet ﷺ and the messengers in the past could have had an impact this man had for goodness, the world would be a much different state, obviously, than it is today. Now, the name Rothschild will be adopted early on. As I mentioned last week, outside of the money-changing shop, counting house of his father, there was the red pagan symbol. That red symbol, of course, rings eerie today when it is donning the flag of Israel, is in, featuring that symbol, which they call the Star of David. You can go back and look at records. This was never associated with Dawood. This was never associated with Judaism. In fact, you could go back and you find it was associated with the opposite. It was associated with pagan deities of the time. This flag, basically, of Israel is basically a Rothschild symbol. We're going to get to that later in the presentation, as they own the vast majority of the land of Israel. And that symbol was outside the gold shop. It is something much more sinister, as we will uncover as we go through this presentation. So the name Rothschild simply translated from German to red shield in honor of this pagan symbol that donned the counting house. Now, in 1760, Mayer Rothschild began working for a bank owned by the Oppenheimer family in Hanover, Germany. As you're going to see as we unwind here again through this presentation, you are going to see the interconnecting networks of these families and these people. They're all on the same team. They help each other out. They give each other the starts. They provide funding. It is a chain. It's a very intricate network that's going to be exposed a little bit tonight, and we are going to continue as we progress through the series. So while working in the bank, he has a relationship, obviously, with the Oppenheimer family. He now becomes close with General von Estorff. This general was associated with Prince William IX of the Hesse-Hanau family. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. They were one of the richest in Europe. Now, how did this family get its money? One of their key practices was they would hire what we would come to know as Hessian soldiers. These Hessian soldiers would be loaned to foreign countries for the purpose of war for huge profits. They made a killing doing this. Hessian soldiers are very famous in European history and were loaned to numerous monarchs, numerous causes. They were well-trained fighters who would go for a fee, of course, for those who arranged it, not the men ultimately who would pay the ultimate price and die, but for the families that arranged it. Now, they still use the same tactics to this day. Now, instead of calling them Hessian soldiers, they call them UN peacekeeping troops. This disturbing practice is worth a whole other topic. I mean, UN troops are some of the most notoriously nasty and vile human beings that you'd ever see in the modern world. If you see the blue hats of the UN troops in your country, nothing good is going to come of it. You could just spend a little bit of time researching that and see exactly what I'm saying is true. In fact, one of the reasons I'm so proud America has a Second Amendment, because if they try to come here and do what they've done in other countries, it's not going to be easy for them. Needless to say, we are armed to the teeth and we are ready. But that's a whole other story for a different time. But again, they continue their practices under a different name. It's always sold to you under a guise of basically it's peace. They're peacekeeping, troops. They're here for your benefit. Well, hardly. Now, Rothschild would take advantage of this relationship with William IX very early on. He would become very well acquainted to him. And by 1769, he would be appointed in the royal court as a court agent. This is one of the things we'll notice in the first half of this series is the way they endeared themselves to the monarchs. We saw this in the last part where we talked about William of Orange when he came back into England. They were already attached to him in the Netherlands or in Holland. And when they came to England, he brought them with him. He took the throne there. Immediately, these Jews were in all these instrumental positions, especially in finance and banking. We're seeing Rothschild working his magic here in Germany. So by doing this, he would become acquainted with rulers through this family all over Europe. These are intermingling bloodlines. They marry. They're all connected. Most of these people have been related. It's typically the same different versions of the same few families that were controlling 100% of the power. And it was just a big, giant mafia or club of controllers. One of the more disgusting things in European history is you see the way these monarchs at a time were revered, by the population when they never benefited the population of Europe in the slightest. You can go and study the feudal system, the exploitation, things that went on, the brutality, the barbarity. These people were not good by any means, not deserving of respect. And of course, for these Jews like Rothschild who attach themselves to these people, it's just evil helping evil, to make it simple here. So in 1770, Rothschild would lay the framework for the creation of, and someone asked about this a few weeks ago, when was I going to talk about the Illuminati? And I said that the Illuminati and the Zionists, the Jews, the Masons, you're going to see when this presentation comes how interconnected they are. They're one and the same. So Rothschild would lay the framework for the creation of the Illuminati. The name of the Illuminati comes from a Luciferian term, meaning keepers of the light or the enlightened ones. This is very big, in Luciferian circles. They refer to Lucifer as the morning star. The morning star appears on the horizon, letting you know that the sun is about to rise. So in pagan culture, this was something to revere. The name was later attached, obviously, to what we would call the Shaitan, but it was about having that secret knowledge. You had that knowledge of what was to come. You were the illuminated. The people, the masses, they're the herd. They're the sheep. They are those to exploit, abuse, and use. You have the secret knowledge. They don't. It's your God-given right to rule over them with power, with hostility, whatever may be needed. And this, again, as you'll see, is heavily represented by their, what they're going to do with this organization. So Rothschild would reach out to a gentleman by the name of Adam Weishaupt. Weishaupt was a crypto Jew, which means a hidden Jew. He was posing as Catholic. So in the community, he was known as a Catholic. Deep down inside, he was a pure follower of, the Rothschild ilk and their creed. But on the surface level, he appeared to be a Catholic to those who knew him in social circles. The main teachings of the Illuminati were based on rabbinic Talmudic Judaism. This is another thing that a lot of Muslims are not aware of. They don't understand the Kabbalah. They don't understand Talmudic Judaism, the differences between this and what we would consider as those following the law of Moses. Big, big difference. The Illuminati would be based on rabbinical Talmudic Judaism. So in 1776, famous year, lots of things were happening in the world at the time. America obviously would declare independence. Well, Adam Weishaupt would basically complete the creation of this project. He would basically divide it up into a series of plans and tenets with goals, and he had all this stuff written and documented down as a manual for exactly what they planned on doing. So we're going to look at this as we go on here in a minute, and we're going to tell you how we know this. Because a lot of people often, when you get to this issue, they're going to say, well, how do you know about all this? You're just making it up. This is just based on hate. This is conspiracy talk. None of this is based in any historical data or reality. Well, we're going to show exactly, by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how this knowledge made its way to the people, ultimately making its way to me to present to us tonight. So the plan is for arms to be provided, and this is the summary, if you will, and conflicts to be manufactured. Keyword, manufactured. They would arm the people. They would create conflicts. They are the social controllers. Manufacturing hate, manufacturing dissent, whether it be people towards the governments, whether it be people towards each other, social causes versus social causes. All you have to do is look at the world right now, and you can see how that blueprint is still being used. I mean, you have such a divide in the United States on racial lines, on political lines, on viewpoints. And you look at behind the scenes who's controlling every single one of these people, it's the exact same cartel, manufacturing and creating dissent. In addition would be the destruction of national governments as they knew them at the time. That mission is going to be accomplished. We're going to see that brick by brick as we go through this presentation. Religious institutions, very key one there. And this is when I've talked about Muslim 2.0, and I talked about all the imams. I mentioned it almost on a weekly basis. The social media influencers, all these people that come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they have a platform. They've got all these views and all these things. This was part of their plan, was to infiltrate religious institutions and guide those people who go to those religious institutions for spirituality, for peace, to get close to Allah, and then guide them towards these deviant causes. We're going to come back to that one in a little bit later. And ultimately, the culmination of this plan would be the eventual destruction of the Goyim. The Goyim in there is cattle. We are to be used and abused as livestock and then discarded when we're no longer needed. And as you're going to see, these people enjoy this. It's not just something about protecting themselves. They enjoy inflicting pain and misery and harm on the Goyim. It is something that thrives, this movement. So with the funding of the Rothschilds, Weishaupt would now, who's still pretending to be non-Jewish, he would infiltrate the Continental Order of the Freemasons. The Freemasons, what they were pre this time to what they've been post, are quite different. Freemasonic lodges are nothing more than recruiting tools for this movement, getting people indoctrinated and getting them to go out there and serve the system. They slowly took over the lodges across the world. Again, when you have access to unlimited capital, imagine what you're going to be able to do. When you have all this money, all this stuff behind you, you are going to be able to go into pretty much any organization you want, buy up influence, and take it over in no time. So this was part, again, of the initial stages of the creation of this movement. Infiltration in the lodges. The Illuminati would take over the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. We're going to look at that later. All the international orders, lodge by lodge, they would control it. Weishaupt would be given approximately 2,000 paid followers to help with the facilitation of this plan. So again, spreading the agenda out, providing capital to these men, paying them for their services, and getting them to go out there and continue to do it. These would be learned men. These are not just peasants. Nah. No, these were men of academics, science, finance, and ministry. These were powerful, influential people, knowledgeable men, intelligent men. These were not just some bum down at the bar. These were the best of the best. Because for as we're going to see later, as the agenda really started to blossom, this is something that would be weaponized against the population, all of our academic institutions, and pretty much all of our government institutions. There would be no stone in this plan left unturned. They would have agents placed in all strategical locations, like I mentioned, finance, history, academia, media later, as we're going to get to, obviously astronomy, science, health, and medicine. And throughout this presentation, we're going to be seeing each one of these industries and when they fell and who was the one that did it. So this is the big, part of this plan, is they had 4 key methods that they were going to use for control. Method number 1, we're going to spend some time on this one, would be to use bribery, and particularly sex bribery, to gain control over men in key positions of power. This method we discussed on this platform in detail. People have asked me a lot of questions about P. Diddy. We've talked about entertainers. Obviously, Jeffrey Epstein's island was allowing child rape and all sorts of other debaucherous things to control and blackmail politicians and media personalities. Power corrupts, and these men, they reach these heights. The dunya opens up for them. The dunya is here for the taking. If they're not disciplined men of faith and God consciousness, these men obviously will initially fall into light levels of sin, light levels of zina. And as it continues to progress, the way sin is, it's like any drug. You have to keep pushing it to the next level to get your rocks off, so to speak. And you find the behavior gets more and more bizarre, more and more debaucherous. They've said, and we're going to cover this tactic throughout this presentation, a couple cases later, probably in maybe a month or so from now, how they get women and beautiful women, spies, to attach themselves to these men and to gain information from them, gain access to their laptops, gain access to their phones. Obviously, that technology didn't exist back then, a little bit more, less you had to worry about now. I mean, they're getting everything. And you're seeing these female spies attaching themselves to these men and getting all kinds of dirt on them, getting them to do things, and then bang, it's all recorded, it's all documented. So this is how they get men who are not a part of the agenda, but came from powerful families, or these were self-made men who had worked themselves up. They got the positions of power. And again, like I mentioned, the dunya is now open to them. Here come the beautiful women. And again, if you don't have that discipline, you don't have that God consciousness, you're going to give in. And now they got you. They've got you bribed. You better vote for that, buddy, or else, your family's going to see this. Or else I'm going to give this to the Associated Press. We are going to destroy you. Oh, that dirty money you took over here, we've got the records of it. It's like a gang. And I kind of made this comparison before, where when you join the gang can't take a risk that you're a police officer or an informant. So the gang gets you to do criminal acts, killing people, committing mass theft or robbery, and they've got dirt on you. They know you're not a cop if you committed the crime. Number 2, if you ever turn on the gang, they have this evidence that they're going to use against you, and you are now bound to the gang for life. It's the same thing here. They've used these tactics in entertainment. Entertainers are powerful. They have a lot of clout. If an entertainer like a Michael Jordan or a Brad Pitt or someone of that level came out and exposed these people, the average person out there would listen to them. It would carry tremendous weight. They couldn't allow that for chance. So you get them to vote the way you want. You get them to say the things that you want them to say, particularly sex bribery. Obviously, some you didn't have to come to that. Financial bribery would be enough. And that's what I believe was happening. We talked about with P. Diddy. Was, again, he was a mogul. He was close to billionaire territory. He was someone who got very famous, made a lot of money, had a lot of control, and they got all aspects of his life documented. If he ever decided to turn on them, they would expose him and take him to the cleaners. And oftentimes things that you see right now, like what you're seeing with him, is their way of saying, remember who put you here. Remember where you come from, buddy. Because if you're going to turn on us, you're done. And they'll give you that little fear, if you will. And if you go back in line, they'll pull it, they'll get you off, and you'll go back to business as usual. But if you want to keep playing games with them, it's going to come out. So method one is something that rings true eerily to this day because they are still using it. People often, there's a famous politician from my state of South Carolina known as Lindsey Graham. Most people suspect that Lindsey Graham is a homosexual. It's kind of obvious. And there's rumors, there's a lot of material on him. He's a married man with kids. And he always votes the Zionist agenda. You can always count on Lindsey. He's going to support Israel to the death. It doesn't matter what Israel does. He's going to say Israel has a right to defend itself. He's going to go on that whole monologue again, and he's going to vote accordingly. And it's obviously most likely here method number one. Now, method number two is also extremely important. All of them are, but this is another big one. Using colleges and universities to recruit exceptional intellect of persons from high stock families or just simply high level achievers. Now, when they would identify these people in the fields of sciences, medicines, mathematics, these are people who are brilliant, who have been zeroed in on, because of their academic aptitude, if you will. Special training would be given to them. They would be provided scholarships. They would go to universities, top level universities, where they would receive globalist-centric training, getting them to be indoctrinated into the one world government, indoctrinated into this system, hook, line, and sinker. Bill Clinton is an example of one of these such people. He was taken, provided a Rhodes Scholarship, which put this man from humble beginnings into Georgetown University and ultimately to Yale Law. You find this all the time. If you see somebody in front of you on a camera who went to Harvard, who went to Yale, who went to Brown, Cornell, Georgetown, these Jesuit universities, these top-notch private institutes, more times than not, it's because they're part of what we're describing here in method number two. Those places are not easy to get into. I've known people who scored as best a grades they possibly could, and they were not accepted into these institutions. But yet you'll find people like George W. Bush, who was there. George W. Bush, obviously, by observing him, is no man of high academic standing by any means, but yet he was there in Yale. And you find when you've got to be highly skeptical when you see people in these places. Yasser Qadi, as an example, Yale University. Look what Yasser Qadi is doing. These places come with a price. It's a deal. You get educated there, you're going to serve the system. If you don't, you're going to be brought back down and humbled and ultimately destroyed. So getting these people as a recruiting pipeline was central because they can't do it all themselves or the public would notice it. You've got to create an organic system that flows naturally, where you're going to get some people who are consciously aware of what they're doing. You are going to get other people who have been brainwashed by the lifestyle, brainwashed by the institutions to serve this agenda. So it flows, as I mentioned, organically. So method number three now that Weishaupt laid out in his plan would ensure that the first two categories of people are placed in the top decision-making capacities. As again, they have to create that illusion of equal opportunity. You hear all the time, oh, in America, you can be anything you want to be. It's all achievable. That is a lie. If you or I spent every hour of my waking day working, bettering myself, there would be no chance I'd be the president of the United States. Every president of the United States, with the exception of Donald Trump, and they haven't found out yet, certainly on him, is connected to this bloodline, including Barack Obama through his mother's side. It's not by chance. Even Bill Clinton, he came from humble origins. His mother, there's a lot of questionable activities in her past where he's most likely appears to be a Rockefeller bastard child of an adulterous affair. So again, even him, who appeared to be at surface level to be some kind of high achiever, is still bloodline. So they have to create that image by giving you different last names, different faces, different personalities. But at the end of the day, behind the curtain, it's the same system. It's the same people. The populace would suspect something if you saw everybody was a Rockefeller or a Warburg or a Habsburg or Rothschild, all these groups of people, a Cohen. You start saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? But no, you get a Clinton and you get a Kennedy and you get a Bush and a Carter and a Reagan and a Trump, all different. You have occasionally the Bush, two of them, in there. But overall, it's a diversity of personalities. As an example, when George Bush in 2004, he ran against John Kerry. John Kerry was this big liberal, and George Bush is the right-wing war hawk conservative. You're getting this kind of pay-per-view boxing match between these supposed two polar opposite ideologies. But yet, John Kerry was a bonesman from Yale, Skull and Bones fraternity. George Bush was a bonesman from Yale, Skull and Bones fraternity. The odds of that happening in an equal system is less than 1% of 1%. It's just not something that would occur without manipulation. So again, they've got to create that guise, that illusion of choice when it comes to voting and selecting leaders. And you see how patriotic people get. It's tribalism, my side versus their side. And we've highlighted all of that here before. But the controllers are unchanged. Now, in method number 4, this is a familiar one, was total control of the press. The press would be the ultimate key to sway public opinion. All news and information will come directly from the talking points of the controllers. For years, this was foolproof. There was no way for the average person in the 1700s, the 1800s, the first half of the 1900s, the 20th century, for people to really know what was going on outside of what they got in their local newspaper. And then when television came out, people started saying, oh, this is the real news here, because I can see images now. I know what they're telling me is the truth. And again, television reporters, you can go watch multiple news stations, and you'll see them reading the exact same script, the exact same wording sometimes, because they're nothing more than a theatrical actor. I remember my grandmother, God bless her soul, her generation, they loved Walter Cronkite and Peter Jennings. She used to tell me, I don't trust most of the media, but that Peter Jennings, I trust him because he had charisma. He was an actor. He read you the news sincerely. He seemed honest. You trusted him. And this plan was foolproof for a very, very long period of time. Up until the internet age, it was extremely effective in swaying public opinion. Now they have a new challenge, which is why you're seeing them taking control of social media. Because initially the internet was the Wild West. It was anything goes. Anyone could come out there with a camera and a voice and a message and maybe get discovered. But slowly but surely you saw what they did with the internet. They bought YouTube up. Now they censor YouTube. Videos used to be able to find on YouTube are no longer there. They're banned and removed. You're not going to find them in the search algorithms. There's so much good content out there that you're simply not going to see. They monopolized that. They monopolized Google early on and took control of that organization. Facebook, Instagram, all these platforms, TikTok, they own them all. They're all conglomerates at this point. And this is, again, why you see all these Muslims in social media I've talked about, your Andrew Tates, a lot of the other ones who I don't want to name to bring them attention. They pop up out of nowhere. Sneeko is another one. And they get huge overnight. They get millions of followers, getting $21 million streaming contracts because they're disinformation agents. You are not going to be that big without being part of the club. They're not going to allow you to have a voice. It's all in method number 4. Social media now is the new media. People are getting their news from the internet, from Twitter, unfortunately in some cases, from YouTube. And they're going to guarantee that these people are serving the agenda. They know what to say and the right things to say. And you see this all the time, with the Islamic movement, why these people are so famous. So you can kind of look at these methods, and now I'd like you to see the world with new eyes. Everything you've been taught from medicine, science, astronomy, health, history, and yes, religion has been given to you more times than not through a filter. If the person is big and famous, it is through a filter. It's not by chance. They're not going to allow someone who has an independent message, a truthful message, to get that level of exposure. How do you think now, by looking at that, they're able to pull off a scam like COVID-19 on such a grand scale? Because you have generations of doctors who've been taught lies to graduate medical school. I've been to university. When you go to university, you know these are the answers to the test. This is from the textbook. I need to get a good grade. You memorize and you regurgitate those answers on your exam paper or in your project. You've been taught lies about the human body. You've been taught lies about medicine. You've been taught all these things, and you need to get your 4.0 GPA. You want to get into medical school, you've got to repeat that information. It starts to stick. You have a whole generation of nothing but repeaters from the press, from the medical institutions, from the science departments, all around. It all starts to make sense why you had so many doctors during the COVID-19 scam talking outright lies. You know, things that safety professionals all throughout industry knew were lies. But you had top doctors repeating this. Either, again, they're part of the brotherhood or they've been indoctrinated in the system under those methods that Adam Weishaupt laid out. All around the world, they were telling you there was some major disease that was killing everybody. But your eyes and ears, when you looked around, the people you knew were telling you a completely different story. You know, I worked in a plant with over 200 people. There was nobody there dying. You know, why was people dying from COVID only dying in the hospitals? No one was dying at home. If it's that dangerous of a disease, you'd have people dying everywhere. This happened during the plague. But yet during COVID, people only died conveniently in the hospital when they were getting intentionally dangerous treatment, such as ventilators and things like they were collapsing lungs and things like that. So again, how they're able to pull this off, because they have people in all these different learning centers, all these different hubs of power. How do you think all these phony moms again and social media influencers are popping up? How are they all coordinated? They all start talking the same deviant messages almost at the exact same time, following marching orders. You know, that's all it is, you know. So now you might ask me, well, Brother Yusuf, how do you know this? How do we know this plan was correct? It was a secret. These guys are conspiracy. They're working behind the scenes. Well, how do we know? Well, I'm going to tell you how we know. Through the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we know. And we know all the details because they were found. In 1784, Adam Weishaupt sent a carrier, and again, we're looking at the world back then. There wasn't no encrypted messages, there's no phone calls, you know, on private cellular networks. You had to use the old-fashioned way, which was a guy on a horse meeting another guy on a horse, maybe going across the boat to meet another guy on a horse. You had a courier system. So Adam Weishaupt sent a courier with a mission to go from Frankfurt, Germany to Paris, France. This courier would contain the marching orders for this plan. The document would detail that the first major strike in their agenda would be the French Revolution. So in the act of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the courier was struck by lightning. He was on his way to deliver these documents. A bolt of lightning came down, struck him, and killed him. The Bavarian police found this. First, they found the body. They started searching the body, and lo and behold, they found this documentation. So without Allah, we do not know of this plan. We may have been able to infer it. We may have been able to speculate. But now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, when you look at the plan there that was highlighted in these documents and you see what they're doing, you know it's the truth. So the Bavarian government immediately took this seriously. They launched raids on lodges and the homes of suspected members. In 1785, the Bavarian government would order the closing of all lodges, and they outlawed the Illuminati or Illuminism throughout the area. The Bavarian government would do the best they could to warn the world. In 1786, they published the findings of the document. The document would be entitled The Original Writings of the Order and Sect of the Illuminati. This would be sent to all major religious and government heads throughout Europe. They wanted to sound the alarm. There's something bad afloat. We need to respond collectively to this plan. But they were ignored. I wonder why. Because they were unaware that this plan had already been brewing, particularly in Western Europe, much longer than Central Europe. And because they had positions of power throughout those societies, and particularly England, they already controlled the banking and the commerce there. These all fell on deaf ears, intentionally basically ignored, and the agenda would move on. So again, you'd ask, if France, if you're, in the French government, the monarchy at the time, the church, why would you again ignore something when they are outlining in that document you are first that they are going to overthrow? Well, again, there was agents already in place in the French government. So again, Allah does not do anything without a purpose. Allah is always in control. Although basically this original document, this published, did not achieve basically the goal of stopping this project, because of this act of God, we're here right now talking about this. Other people have exposed it decades before I sit in front of you here today, because of the grace of Allah. Allah is always in control. Always we're going to find out what the truth truly is. The light will be shined on the darkness. So because the warnings were ignored, the French Revolution would succeed. And they removed from power, particularly their target of the Catholic Church. The state would seize control of Catholic-owned lands and turn it into currency, turn it in for currency. The state would assume funding of all Catholic responsibilities, caring for the poor, and in particular, appointing clergymen and bishops. Now, if there's ever any Christians watching me, I hope there is. Those who blindly follow this Catholic Church, I've seen them in social media. They're wondering, why is the Pope like this? Why is the Pope promoting such deviancy? Why are they being tolerant now to homosexuality? Why is the Pope saying the things he's saying? Why is the Christian church going in the direction it's going? You have your answers right here. Because it was a target. They wanted to make sure that these appointed positions were controlled. They would put their guys there the same way they put their guys in the academic institutions, in the media companies, in the medical establishment, in all the major fields. Same exact thing was done here. So in 1790, Mayor Rothschild, after this coup d'etat, if you will, would famously state, "Let me issue and control a nation's currency, and I care not who makes the laws." They understood the game. They understood how to manipulate and control. The ultimate weapon was control of the currency of the nation. And now they weren't just done with France. France fell. We're talking about Napoleon a little bit today, and then as we bleed into next week's, and the attempts to override this. But in 1790, Mayor Rothschild, the United States was in Rothschild's crosshairs, if you will. The United States at this point in time was 14 years into its existence as an independent nation, no longer colonies like it was previously. They had independence from the crown. And the Rothschild-controlled asset, who goes by the name of Alexander Hamilton, who's heralded in American history, I wonder why, would create the first bank of the United States. It's called the First Bank of the United States, and they signed a 20-year charter. This is under George Washington. Alexander Hamilton was there, Zionist-controlled agent, controlled agent, pushing this legislation through. And now the United States had a central bank just like that, not even basically a new country, barely a new country, an infant, if you will, and already they had this. Within 5 years, if you listen to part one, you can pretty much guess what happened. The United States would borrow $8.2 million. This would overall create massive inflation during the era, which would cause U.S. prices to rise by 72%. And this, of course, caused all kinds of problems, the value of the currency, again, taking your purchasing power. We went through that cycle in part one of how they slowly bring you into poverty and how they seize your assets, your real assets, not this useless paper money they're giving you. It's worth nothing but the paper they're printing it on. They're getting your real things, your agriculture, your land, your companies, your institutions, your oil and gas in the modern day age, your steel, your raw materials. These are the things they covet. These are the things that have value, not this useless paper money that they've duped our politicians and our governments into taking. Thomas Jefferson would lead a charge, against this. Thomas Jefferson would famously state, "I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution, taking from the federal government the power of borrowing. Thomas Jefferson early on was a righteous man. He saw the writing on the wall that this is something that is to the detriment of the United States. This cannot continue. This is unsustainable. You've got basically politicians in there, who are borrowing at will. And we're going to get to that here in a minute as to why. So again, what incentive then do wealthy men in government have not to take cheap money? It is the ultimate drug. They can help their friends out here. Okay, we'll vote on this for you. You give us money, we'll give you this back in funding. You can create all these different opportunities to make yourself tremendously wealthy, to make your friends and family tremendously wealthy. And again, you're not going to bear the brunt of the suffering for this because you're at the top end of the chain, at least initially. As we talked about last week, those who get access to the money first benefit the most from it. What this is going to do, however, is going to inflict massive suffering on the average middle class and lower middle class and their quality of living. Population is going to lose their purchasing power. All of a sudden, they're barely able to feed, house, and clothe themselves. But for those wealthy politicians, you can look at the ones like Nancy Pelosi as an example, with all her dirty businesses, insider trading. Nancy Pelosi's worth over $200 million at this point, from getting a salary of $175,000 for however many years she's been in there. Either she's the best at saving money, she saves more than she earns, actually, in fact, or she's involved in a lot of dirty dealings and corrupt business. But does Nancy Pelosi care if $200 million is now worth what $50 million was in 1960? Absolutely not. Because $200 million is a lot of money, $50 million was a lot of money in 1960. So she's able to keep up with the inflation. Her power is not changing. She's getting that same thing as the bankers. They're getting access to more of it and more opportunities to have more of it. They don't care if it inflates. Who does this affect? It affects the guy making $75,000 or making $60,000 or $50,000. We're now making $50,000 nowadays would be like making $10,000 to $15,000 a few decades ago. Now you're facing a problem because you can no longer live comfortably. You can barely live at all with a salary that would have been extremely comfortable a few years ago. When you got $200 million of this fake money, you're pretty good. So always, as Thomas Jefferson is warning, the incentives for our politicians is very strong. And no government should be allowed to borrow money from an external source, a cartel of foreign bankers. Now, John Robinson would publish a book entitled Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in secret meetings of Freemason, Illuminati, and higher ed societies. So he published this book, and we're going to look at who he is in a minute. Really it's a big, massive title, but he wanted everyone to really catch your eye here with this book, showing that this was a broad conspiracy going after all aspects of life. And he was a high-ranking member of the Scottish Rite and was approached by Weishaupt to join in on the plan. He was an influential academic, an intellect, smart man. He was, offered basically, you want in on this. We could use people like you. Going back to plans I talked about earlier, Plan 2, where they would recruit highly successful, academic, intelligent people. So he pretended to go along with this plan. So this is our second source of information here, other than the Courier we covered earlier. So he's basically asked to join. He agrees. All the while, he's secretly doing this to gather information to expose the plan and save Europe and the West. He was one of many during this period of time. We talked about trying to stop this from the Bavarian government and their agents. Now we have Mr. John Robinson trying to do the same thing, all falling, unfortunately, on deaf ears because so much of the agenda was already well on the way. In that same year, we have here 1798, another monumental event, which we're going to look at next week, would take place where Mr. Nathan Rothschild, he was the signature son of Mayor Rothschild, the patriarch of this dynasty. Nathan was the most cunning, the most ruthless, the most brilliant, you can say brilliant in a demonic or evil sense, not brilliant in a beneficial to humanity sense. And he was provided a large amount of money by his father. His mission, go to England and totally take control of the economy. Now, they already had it well underway, as we went over in part one, but they wanted more. They wanted to get their hooks in all aspects of British military-industrial complex. They wanted to get assets in all the British economy, from agriculture to steel to everything that was going on there. They wanted to have absolute control over it. So Nathan's mission, large sum of money, goes into England with a plan. We're going to go through that one in part three as we get to that, and it's a historical date. Now, in 1800, after the French Revolution, guess what? The Bank of France would be set up. You can't make this up. You know, you had the Catholic Church losing their land, appointing the bishops. Here's the bank. So the same process, same playbook. Now, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was rising during this period of time, would famously state, "The hand that gives is among the hand that takes. Money has no motherland. Financiers are without patriotism and without decency. Their sole object is gain." And did he mean gain in a material sense, or he meant gaining in total power? Obviously, we know which one as we're studying these people. Finance is there for them. They print money. They can have anything they want. This is something much more sinister. And Napoleon will go on to state his objective in 1806 was to remove the House of Hesse-Kassel. We talked about them earlier with the Hessian soldiers, from rulership, and to strike it out of the list of powers. Now, as we look at Napoleon next week, when I was growing up, they taught me Napoleon was one of the antichrists. I mean, Napoleon was just evil. He was like Hitler. You know, these are the bad guys. These are the guys in history, along with Andrew Jackson, who we're also going to talk about in our coming sessions as well. These were men to be vilified and demonized. And we're going to see exactly why that is, because who's controlling the press? Who's controlling the perception of these men? And they've done everything they can to run these men's names into the ground. Henry Ford from Ford Automobile Company, we'll get to him way later on down the list. As we get to the 1900s, he is another of these such figures. So upon hearing of basically Napoleon's threat, Rothschild partner Prince William, we went through him earlier, one who facilitated his appointing to the court, who helped Rothschild really get going with government and monarchy. He fled his home in Germany to head to a safe haven in Denmark. They were afraid of what Napoleon's mission was going to be. And he would leave care of his fortune, guess who, to his close buddy, Mayor Rothschild, for safekeeping. This fortune was estimated at the time to be $3 million. That is massive. We were talking about the United States just a few minutes ago, had taken a massive loan for $8+ million. That was a government. This man himself had $3 million in his name that he left to his close buddy for safekeeping. That was a lot of money during that time, a lot. And this man was extremely powerful, and you can just see the level of corruption that this Prince William was involved in. So not all was well, however, for their plan in the United States. And part of what prompted me, some brothers had asked me before, and some sisters as well, to talk about the fall of America. Because America, we talked about, had a central bank in the early days of this country. But what happened in 1807 was we had a new president, Thomas Jefferson. And he would make a profound statement: nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. This is in 1807. He was already savvy enough to see what was going on. He goes on to say, truth itself becomes suspicious by being put in that polluted vehicle. So it's so polluted in such lies that even when they do say the truth, you don't necessarily even believe it because it's overshadowed by all the lies. The real extent of this state of misinformation is known only to those who are in situations to confront fact within their knowledge with the lies of the day. So we see a profound quote here from Thomas Jefferson. He knew what was going on. Even back then, they were seeing what was wrong with the media and how the media was outright lying. And you couldn't even discern truth from falsehood because it was all just a jumbled up mess. Now, in 1811, that bank charter we talked about in 1791, it's 20 years now. The charter to renew the Bank of America was up for vote in the U.S. Congress. This was during the time, again, massive inflation that this bank had caused. So you had a revolt in government to strike down this charter. And Nathan Rothschild, who was now the head of the family, needless to say, was not happy with this. He would go on to issue the following statement: either the application for renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself involved in a most disastrous war. This is a threat from a foreign banker that should have been taken utmost serious by the United States against a new country at the time. But here you have a man living in England issuing a threat like this: I'm going to bring you war if you don't vote for this charter. And these are the people, we're told, the descendants of these are our greatest ally in the state of Israel, the Middle East. This is the ally. This is the great people they are. Again, it was, if you're not going to be our slaves, we are going to kill you, is basically what Mr. Nathan Rothschild would say. He would go on to say, we're going to get to that one here in a second. I'm sorry, I missed my note line here. The U.S., of course, would ignore Mr. Rothschild's warning. They throw it out. The charter was not going to be renewed. The bank was going to be dead on arrival, was not going to be renewed, which then he would go on to say, which I meant to say now before: teach them imprudent Americans a lesson. Bring them back to colonial status. So he threatens the war before. Now the charter is not renewed, and he's saying, we're going to teach you a lesson. You're going back to colonial status. We're basically going to take you back to the colonial days. You are going to be ruled over. We are going to control you. So again, you have another threat. And this is the Zionists today, isn't it? They are now dragging us into another of their wars. Our young men will go there and get killed, fighting and dying for this wretched lot, these wretched people. Our government would stand up to them during this period of time, but nowadays they do not. The control has just grown. This plan has fully blossomed into the United States, and we see pretty much zero realistic pushback, against this agenda. It's the same thing. We're seeing it now. If the United States does not support them, God knows what they'll do. What kind of harm economically or culturally or they'll bring on the United States. As we're going to get through their system here in America over the next coming weeks, you'll see again, every stone, no stone is left unturned. It is all here. So when we go forward, we are going to look at next week. We are going to continue the session going through the aftermath of this. What were the consequences that Nathan was speaking of? What was he going to do? What war did he promise the United States? And it would happen in a year. It didn't even take a year. Back then was like a month now. How long it took to coordinate, to move, to organize. Within a year, the United States would be involved in a war that would threaten its very existence. A war that, when they give you the motives in school, they conveniently leave out these statements. These are documented statements. These are threats. And then afterwards, you have the action showing the threats were real, that he intended to do everything he stated that he was going to do. And the message was clear. You're either going to be controlled or we're going to bring bloodshed, on you. And we'll start off with the War of 1812 and Nathan's promise, being fulfilled. But ultimately, the United States would triumph, in that conflict, and he would not get exactly, what he had hoped for, and they would go back to the drawing board and continue again and again until ultimately they would defeat us. And again, we're going to chronicle that journey as we move on here. So I will stop there. As always, questions.